Nobody really prepares you for how quiet the desert gets when your engine dies. I'd been driving from Phoenix to Las Vegas for a job interview, 33, and desperate enough to chase any opportunity that would get me out of my dead-end waitressing gig. My old Corolla had been making weird noises since Wickenburg, but I kept pushing it, telling myself it would hold together just a few more hours. When the temperature gauge shot into the red and steam started pouring from under the hood somewhere past nothing, Arizona, I knew I'd pushed my luck too far. I managed to coast to the shoulder before everything went dead, and then I was just sitting there in the sudden silence, watching heat waves dance off the empty asphalt in both directions. I tried my phone first, of course, but there was nothing, not even one bar of signal. I got out and popped the hood, pretending I knew what I was looking at while coolant dripped onto the cracked earth beneath the car. The sun was brutal even though it was already past 4 in the afternoon. October in the desert still hot enough to make you dizzy if you stood in it too long. I kept checking my phone every few minutes like maybe the cell towers would magically appear, but the screen stayed stubbornly blank. No cars had passed in either direction for at least 20 minutes, and I was starting to realize just how alone I really was out here. Miles from the last gas station I'd seen, probably miles from the next one too. After about an hour of waiting, I'd drunk half my water bottle and was seriously considering whether I should start walking when I finally saw something moving in the distance. It was coming from behind me, a dark shape wavering in the heat mirages, and as it got closer I could make out an old pickup truck, maybe from the 80s, painted some faded color between brown and rust. The truck slowed as it approached, and I found myself stepping back from the road a little, suddenly aware of how vulnerable I looked standing there alone. But what choice did I have? I needed help, and this might be the only vehicle I'd see for hours. The truck pulled up behind my car, and the engine cut off with a rattling sigh that reminded me of my grandfather's old farm equipment. The driver's door opened and a man stepped out, probably in his 50s, wearing jeans and a plaid shirt that had seen better days. He had one of those faces that could have belonged to anybody's uncle, kind of weathered but not threatening, with gray stubble and crow's feet around blue eyes. He walked toward me with this easy, unhurried stride, and when he smiled, it reached his eyes in a way that made me relax just a little. "Car trouble?" he asked, and his voice had this gentle drawl that made me think of Sunday dinners and church potlucks. I explained about the overheating, and he nodded like he'd heard this story 100 times before, then went to look under my hood, making those thoughtful humming sounds men make when they want you to think they know what they're doing. "Radiator's shot," he announced after a few minutes, wiping his hands on his jeans. "You're gonna need a tow, and the nearest shop is in Kingman, about 40 miles up the road. I can give you a ride there if you want. Got nothing but time today." He must have seen me hesitate because he quickly added, "Or I can just call someone when I get to town, but honestly, tow trucks out here can take 4-5 hours sometimes, and it'll be dark soon." I looked at the sun, already starting its descent toward the horizon, painting the desert in shades of orange and gold. The thought of being stranded here alone after dark made my decision for me. I grabbed my purse and phone from the car, locked it even though it seemed pointless out here, and followed him to his truck. The inside of his truck smelled like cigarettes and something sweet, maybe old coffee or energy drinks. There were receipts scattered on the dashboard, a rosary hanging from the rearview mirror, and a collection of air fresheners that had long since stopped freshening anything. I buckled my seatbelt as he started the engine, and we pulled onto the highway heading west. For the first few minutes, everything seemed normal enough. He asked where I was headed, and I told him about the job interview, keeping the details vague. He talked about living in the area his whole life, knowing these roads like the back of his hand. But then, maybe 10 minutes into the drive, he took an exit I hadn't even noticed, turning onto a narrow road that curved away from the highway and into the desert. "Is this the way to Kingman?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual even though my pulse had suddenly picked up. He didn't answer right away, just kept driving, his fingers drumming against the steering wheel in some rhythm only he could hear. "Shortcut," he finally said, but he didn't look at me when he said it. Main roads got construction this time of day. Backs everything up for miles. These back roads are better, quicker. The road we were on was barely paved, more dirt than asphalt in places, and I couldn't see any signs or markers anywhere. I shifted in my seat, suddenly very aware that my door handle wasn't where my hand expected it to be. When I found it and gave it a subtle tug, nothing happened. The lock was down, but when I reached to pull it up, it wouldn't budge. "Child locks," he said, and I could see him watching me from the corner of his eye. "Sorry about that, been meaning to fix them. Sometimes they stick." But his explanation felt rehearsed, like he'd said it before, and the way his jaw tightened after he spoke made my stomach twist into knots. We were completely alone out here now. No other cars, no buildings, just endless desert scrub and mountains in the distance. He started muttering to himself, so quiet I could barely make out the words. Something about roots and eyes and keeping things clean. Every time I asked how much further to town, he'd just nod and say, "Soon, real soon." But we'd been driving for 20 minutes now and there was still nothing but desert. Then I saw it, just for a second when he reached for his water bottle. Something metallic catching the late afternoon light from under his seat. Handcuffs. Real ones, not the toy kind, with the chain between them wrapped around something dark. My whole body went rigid, but I forced myself to look away, to keep staring straight ahead like I hadn't seen anything. But my breathing had changed, coming faster and shallower, and I knew he'd noticed. His demeanor shifted then, the fake friendliness dropping away like a mask he was tired of wearing. "These routes are safer," he said, his voice different now, flatter, more matter of fact. "Fewer eyes out here. People don't pay attention to what happens on roads they don't travel." My hand moved slowly to my purse, feeling for my phone even though I knew there was still no signal. That's when I saw the shoe, a woman's sneaker, white with pink laces, wedged between the floor mat and the door on his side. It was dirty, stained with something dark around the heel, and it was just one shoe. Just one. I knew then with absolute certainty that I was living through one of those stories you read about in the news. Woman accepts ride from stranger, disappears. Body found weeks later in the desert if found at all. My mind was racing, trying to remember everything from those true crime shows, those self-defense articles I'd skimmed but never really paid attention to. He was bigger than me, stronger, and we were going at least 60 miles per hour on this dirt road. Jumping out would kill me as surely as whatever he had planned. But staying in this truck was taking me further from the highway, further from help, further from anyone who might hear me scream. The sun was getting lower now, casting long shadows across the desert floor, and he turned on the headlights even though it wasn't quite dark yet. "Almost there," he said, and the way he smiled when he said it made bile rise in my throat. That's when I did something that probably saved my life. I forced myself to smile back, to lean into whatever sick game he thought we were playing. "You know what?" I said, making my voice as steady as I could manage. "I really need to pee, like desperately. Must be all that water I drank waiting for you to show up." He glanced at me, suspicious, but I crossed my legs and did this little bounce in my seat that my college roommate used to do when she'd had too many beers. "Please," I added. "I don't want to mess up your truck." Something about that last part got to him, the idea of his space being contaminated, and he started slowing down, looking for a spot. When he pulled over near some tall desert brush, he turned to me with eyes that had gone completely cold. 2 minutes, he said, reaching across me to unlock my door manually, his arm brushing against me in a way that made my skin want to crawl right off my body. "And don't think about running. There's nowhere to go out here." But I was already calculating distances and angles as I stepped out of the truck. He stayed in the driver's seat, watching me walk toward the bushes, and I knew I had maybe 10 seconds once I was out of his direct line of sight. Instead of stopping at the first cluster of brush, I kept walking, faster, until I heard his door open behind me. Then I ran. Not in a straight line away from the road, where he could easily follow in his truck, but at an angle, toward a cluster of massive boulders I'd spotted about 100 yards away. I heard him shouting, heard the truck engine roar to life, but I didn't look back. I scrambled up those rocks like my life depended on it, because it did, squeezing myself into a crevice between two huge stones, just as his headlights swept across where I'd been standing. He drove around those rocks for what felt like hours, but was probably only 30 minutes, yelling things that made me press my hands against my ears, promising he'd find me, that the desert would kill me anyway, that I was making everything worse. Eventually, the engine sounds grew fainter, then disappeared entirely. I stayed wedged in those rocks until the sun came up, shaking from cold and fear, checking my phone obsessively until finally, around 6 in the morning, I got 1 bar of signal. The 911 operator kept asking me where I was, but all I could tell her was somewhere off the highway between Phoenix and Kingman, near some big rocks. It took search and rescue 3 hours to find me, following my phone's GPS signal. And when they did, I was dehydrated, sunburned, and could barely speak. They found my car right where I'd left it, but there were fresh tire tracks behind it that didn't match any of the rescue vehicles. The police took my statement, took it very seriously when I described the truck, the handcuffs, the shoe. They said I was lucky, that my instincts had saved me, that running when I did was the smartest thing I could have done. They never found him, though they said my description matched reports they'd gotten over the past 2 years. Always different stretches of empty highway, always women traveling alone. They showed me photos of 3 missing women, asked if I'd seen anything else in his truck that might have belonged to them. I couldn't help them. I'd been too focused on getting out alive. Sometimes I think about that white sneaker with pink laces, wonder who wore it, if she had someone waiting for her to come home. I think about how he knew exactly where to take that exit, how practiced his movements were, how many times he'd probably done this before. I never made it to that job interview, never rescheduled it either. I stayed in Phoenix, got a job at a call center where I'm surrounded by people all day, where someone would notice if I didn't show up. I bought a new car, something reliable, and I never drive alone through the desert anymore. When friends complain about the cost of airfare, I just tell them it's worth it. They don't understand why I'm so adamant about it, and I hope they never have to. Everyone warned me about taking Highway 50 through Nevada in August, but when you're trying to make it to a job interview in Salt Lake City and your flight gets canceled, you do what you have to do. I'd borrowed my brother's old Ford Explorer, the one he swore could handle anything, and left Reno around noon on a Thursday. 4 hours into the drive, somewhere between Fallon and Austin, where there's nothing but sagebrush and heat mirages for miles, the temperature gauge started climbing into the red. I pulled over immediately, killed the engine, and popped the hood to a cloud of steam that burned my face. The radiator was done, completely blown, and antifreeze was pooling under the car like green blood. I grabbed my phone to call for help, but of course there was no signal, not even a single bar, just that mocking, no service message that might as well have said, "You're screwed." I waited about 20 minutes for the engine to cool down, trying to convince myself that maybe I could limp to the next town. But when I turned the key, the Explorer made a grinding sound and died completely. Austin was at least 30 miles ahead and Fallon was 50 behind me. I had maybe half a bottle of water, dress shoes because of the interview, and the sun was hitting that special kind of brutal, where the asphalt actually looks wet from the heat waves. I locked the car, left a note on the windshield saying I'd walk toward Austin, and started moving. My father had always told me to stay with the vehicle in situations like this, wait for someone to come by. But after 40 minutes without seeing a single car pass, I figured walking gave me better odds than sitting in a metal box slowly cooking myself. About an hour into my walk, maybe 3 miles from the Explorer, I stopped to take a tiny sip of water and noticed something on a ridge to my right, maybe a quarter mile off the road. It was a dark blue SUV, one of those big Chevrolet Suburbans just sitting there among the scrub brush and rocks. The thing was covered in dust like it had been there for days, but what made me pause was how it was positioned, facing directly toward the highway, toward me. I figured maybe someone else had broken down and abandoned their vehicle. Happens all the time out here. But then I saw the sun glint off the windshield in a way that meant the glass was clean. recently cleaned. I kept walking, telling myself I was being paranoid, that the heat was getting to me, but I couldn't help glancing back every few minutes. 20 minutes later, I checked again, and the SUV had moved. Not drastically, but it was definitely on a different part of the ridge, maybe 100 yards closer to where I was now. Same vehicle, same dusty blue color, but parked at a slightly different angle, still facing me. My mouth went dry, and it wasn't just from the heat. I picked up my pace, my dress shoes already giving me blisters that felt like hot coins pressed against my heels. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe there were two similar vehicles. Maybe I was getting confused by the heat shimmer. But when I looked back again after another 15 minutes, the Suburban was on an even closer ridge, parallel to where I was walking. Someone was following me, staying off-road, watching me struggle along this empty highway. I started jogging, which was stupid in that heat, but fear does things to your judgment. My shirt was soaked through, sticking to me like wet paper, and I could feel the sun burning through the fabric. The water bottle was nearly empty now, maybe 2 swallows left, and I was still at least 20 miles from Austin. Every time I looked back, that SUV had repositioned itself, always maintaining the same distance, but following my progress like a shark tracking wounded prey. At one point, I stopped and waved my arms, trying to signal for help, hoping maybe they'd come down and offer a ride. But the vehicle just sat there, engine off, waiting. I could barely make out the windshield from that distance, but I swear I could feel eyes on me, studying me, measuring how much fight I had left. The sun started dropping around 6, throwing long shadows across the desert floor, and the temperature began its dramatic swing toward freezing. Desert cold hits different when you're soaked in sweat and exhausted. Cuts right through you like you're made of tissue paper. I'd been walking for nearly 5 hours. My feet were raw and bleeding inside my shoes, and I'd finished the water 2 hours ago. The SUV hadn't shown itself for the last 30 minutes, and I let myself hope that maybe whoever it was had gotten bored, had driven off to torment someone else. Then I heard it, the low rumble of an engine starting up somewhere behind me, echoing off the rocky hills. I turned around and saw headlights flash once, twice, then go dark. The Suburban was on the highway now, maybe a half-mile back, just sitting there in the growing darkness. I kept walking, but now I could hear it creeping behind me, that big engine barely above idle, tires crunching slowly on the asphalt. No headlights, just this massive shadow moving through the darkness at maybe 2 miles per hour, matching my pace exactly. When I stopped, it stopped. When I started again, it started. I tried yelling back at them, my voice cracking from dehydration, asking what they wanted, begging for water, for help, for anything. No response, just that steady engine growl following me like death itself had taken the form of a Chevrolet. My legs were shaking now, not just from exhaustion but from the cold that was settling into my bones, and I knew I couldn't keep this up much longer. I thought about leaving the road, heading into the desert, but that would be suicide, even without someone hunting me. The terrain out there was all ravines and loose rock, impossible to navigate in the dark, especially in dress shoes that were already falling apart. Plus, whoever was in that SUV knew this area, had been tracking me off-road all afternoon like they'd done it before. They were waiting for something, waiting for me to collapse, to give up, and the sick part was they were enjoying it. I could tell by the way they'd flash their lights occasionally, just to remind me they were there, or rev the engine slightly when I stumbled. This wasn't about robbery, wasn't about anything logical. This was entertainment for them, watching someone slowly break down in the middle of nowhere. Around midnight, my body started shutting down. I was stumbling more than walking, my vision going blurry, and I could barely feel my feet anymore. The cold had turned vicious, probably down in the 40s, and I was shivering so hard my teeth were chattering like a broken typewriter. The SUV was closer now, maybe 50 feet behind me, and I could hear music playing softly from inside. Some old country song I couldn't quite make out. Then the passenger window rolled down, and I heard laughter, not crazy or maniacal, just casual, like friends sharing a joke at a bar. There were at least 2 of them, maybe 3, and one of them threw something that landed near my feet. It was a water bottle, still sealed, condensation on the plastic catching the moonlight. I stood there staring at it, knowing it was bait, knowing they wanted to see me crawl for it. I didn't pick it up. Call it pride, call it stupidity. But something in me refused to give them that satisfaction. I kept walking, leaving that bottle behind, and I heard more laughter. Then the window rolling back up. The SUV backed up, stopped next to the bottle, and someone got out to retrieve it. In the darkness, I could only see a silhouette, tall and lean, moving with the casual confidence of someone who knew exactly how this would end. They got back in, and the vehicle resumed its crawl behind me. That's when I saw lights coming from the opposite direction, actual headlights cutting through the darkness, and I started waving my arms like a madman, stepping into the middle of the road. It was a semi-truck, and thank God the driver saw me in time, hitting the brakes and pulling over. The trucker was a woman named Dolores, built like a linebacker with arms covered in military tattoos, and she took one look at me and pulled a pistol from her door compartment, not pointing it at me, but holding it ready. She asked if I was alone, and when I turned to point at the SUV, it was gone. No taillights, no engine sound, nothing. Just empty highway stretching back into darkness. Dolores believed me, though. Said she'd seen that same Suburban parked on different ridges when she'd driven through earlier that day. Said there'd been stories among truckers about people going missing on this stretch. Abandoned cars found, but never the drivers. She let me ride with her to Austin, even gave me water and beef jerky from her stash, and called ahead to have a sheriff meet us at the truck stop. They never found the SUV or whoever was in it. The sheriff took my report, said they'd increase patrols, but we both knew that meant nothing out here, where there's 100 miles of nothing between towns. Dolores gave me her number, told me to call if I ever needed anything, and I caught a Greyhound back to Reno the next morning. I didn't get the job in Salt Lake City, didn't even call to reschedule. Some experiences change what matters to you. I still think about that night sometimes, about what would have happened if that truck hadn't come. Were they planning to wait until I collapsed completely? Then what? Take me somewhere? Leave me there? I'll never know. And honestly, that's probably for the best. What I do know is that evil doesn't always look like what you'd expect. Sometimes it's just patient people with too much time, watching from a distance, waiting for someone vulnerable enough to play with. Nathan and I had exactly 4 days to get from Ohio to California before that warehouse job started. And the 12-year-old Corolla we bought for $800 was our only shot at making it happen. We found it on Craigslist from this retired teacher who kept apologizing for the faded paint and the duct tape holding the side mirror, but he swore the engine was solid, said he'd driven it to Florida just last year without any problems. Both of us had dropped out of college the semester before, and this job in Fresno was paying $18 an hour with guaranteed overtime, which was more money than either of us had ever made. We threw our stuff in garbage bags, tossed them in the back seat, and figured if we took turns driving straight through and slept at rest stops, we'd have just enough cash left for gas and maybe some actual meals instead of living on energy drinks and beef jerky. Nathan's mom cried when we left, kept saying we were idiots for trusting our lives to some stranger's old car. But when you're drowning in student loans and the best job you can find locally is 10 hours a week at a grocery store, you take the chances you get. We made good time for the first day and a half, switching drivers every 4 hours, following the GPS through states that all started to blur together after a while. I was trying to sleep in the passenger seat while Nathan drove, my neck twisted at this uncomfortable angle against the window, when I felt the car starting to lose power and heard Nathan muttering something I couldn't quite make out. The engine was making this grinding sound, like someone was forcing metal gears to turn without oil, and no matter how hard Nathan pressed the accelerator, we kept slowing down. We barely made it off the highway and into this town that wasn't even marked on our GPS. Just a handful of buildings clustered around one main street that looked like time had stopped somewhere in the 80s. Most of the storefronts were either boarded up or had those sun-bleached for lease signs that had probably been there for years. And at the very end of the street sat a mechanic shop in what used to be a gas station, with 2 garage bays and a hand-painted sign that said repairs in letters that were cracking and peeling like old skin. The mechanic who came out when we pulled in was probably in his 50s, wearing coveralls that might have been blue once, but had faded to this sick grayish color, stained with patches of oil that looked like they'd been there since the shop opened. He had this way of walking that made me uncomfortable right away, taking these slow, deliberate steps like he was measuring the distance between us, and his eyes never quite focused on what you'd expect them to focus on. When Nathan explained about the grinding noise and how we'd lost power on the highway, the guy just stood there nodding for way too long, like he was listening to music only he could hear. Then he asked where we were headed, and when we said California, he got this expression on his face that I can only describe as hungry, like we'd just told him exactly what he wanted to hear. He kept asking these weird questions while he looked under the hood, stuff like whether anyone was expecting us at a specific time, if we'd told people which route we were taking, whether we had family who'd come looking if we didn't show up. Nathan was answering casually, too focused on the engine to notice how strange it all was, but I was standing there watching this guy's face, and something about the way he kept glancing at our license plates and then back at us made my chest feel tight. He told us the problem was with the fuel pump, said it was barely hanging on, and we were lucky we made it to his shop when we did, because another few miles, and we would have been stranded on the highway with no cell service for 20 miles in either direction. The way he said lucky made it sound like the opposite, dragging the word out while he wiped his hands on this filthy rag he pulled from his pocket, leaving more grease on his fingers than he removed. He quoted us $300 for the repair, said he happened to have the right pump in stock, which was unusual for such an old model. Wasn't that fortunate, and he could have us back on the road in about an hour. Nathan and I exchanged looks because $300 would eat up almost all our emergency fund. But what choice did we have? While the mechanic worked, he kept up this steady stream of conversation, talking about how not many people came through anymore, how the interstate had killed the town, how he sometimes went weeks without seeing new faces. He had this assistant, a younger guy maybe in his 30s with a lazy eye and fingernails caked with dirt, who never said a word but kept walking past us to grab tools he clearly didn't need, staring at us sideways like we were animals in a zoo. When the mechanic finally said we were good to go, he made this big show of starting the engine and revving it, grinning at us with teeth that were all different shades of yellow and brown, some of them looking like they were rotting right out of his head. He kept his hand on Nathan's shoulder for way too long when he handed over the keys, squeezing just hard enough that I saw Nathan flinch, and said we should be real careful on these roads. Lots of dangerous curves coming up. Wouldn't want anything unfortunate to happen to 2 nice boys like us. The assistant was standing in the doorway to the office, blocking it partially with his body, and I noticed he had our credit card receipt in his hand even though we'd paid cash, waving it slowly like he was trying to memorize the numbers. Nathan practically dragged me to the car, both of us moving faster than we wanted to admit, and we peeled out of there without looking back, both of us pretending we weren't as scared as we actually were. For the first 10 minutes back on the highway, we didn't talk at all, just kept checking the mirrors and listening to the engine, which was running smooth and quiet like nothing had ever been wrong with it. Nathan finally broke the silence, saying something about how we should call his mom when we got cell service back, let her know we were okay, and I was about to agree when I noticed the temperature gauge starting to creep up. It was subtle at first, just edging past the normal range, but within another 5 minutes it was climbing steadily toward the red zone. Nathan was already slowing down, looking for a place to pull over, when we heard it. This soft tapping sound coming from under the hood, rhythmic and deliberate, like someone knocking on a door. The smell hit us next, this sweet chemical odor that made my eyes water, and Nathan barely got us onto the shoulder before smoke started pouring out from the edges of the hood. We sat there for maybe 30 seconds, both of us knowing we should get out and look but neither of us wanting to, when Nathan grabbed my arm hard enough to bruise and pointed at the side mirror. There was a truck coming up behind us, moving slower than the rest of the traffic. This rust-covered Ford that I recognized immediately because it had been parked beside the mechanic shop with its hood popped open like it was being worked on. The mechanic was driving. I could see his silhouette through the windshield. And he wasn't trying to pass us or pull over to help, just maintaining this steady distance about 50 feet back. Close enough that we could see him, but far enough that it might look coincidental to anyone else. Nathan tried to start the car again, but the engine just made this horrible screeching sound, and more smoke billowed out, thick and black now, making it hard to see through the windshield. The truck behind us flashed its lights once, real slow and deliberate, not like someone trying to be helpful, but like someone sending a signal, letting us know they were there, that they were waiting. I grabbed Nathan's phone to call for help, but we still had no signal. Just that no service message mocking us from the screen. And when I looked back, the truck had pulled closer, maybe 30 feet now, and I could see the assistant in the passenger seat, leaning forward like he was eager for something to happen. Nathan was saying we should get out and run, just leave everything and run into the field beside the highway. But I kept thinking about what the mechanic had said about 20 miles without cell service in either direction. How he'd smiled when he said it like he was sharing some private joke. The truck's engine revved behind us, not moving any closer but not backing off either, and I realized they were waiting for something specific, maybe for the rest of the traffic to thin out, maybe for it to get darker, maybe just enjoying watching us panic. I fumbled with the hood release, thinking maybe I could see what they'd done, fix it somehow. But Nathan grabbed my wrist and pointed ahead where another car was pulling over. This beat-up sedan with a family inside, the dad already getting out to walk toward us. The truck behind us immediately started moving, passing us at normal speed like any other vehicle would, the mechanic not even glancing our way as he went by. But I saw the assistant turn his head to stare at us, dragging his finger across his throat real slow before they disappeared around the next curve. The dad from the sedan was this heavy-set guy wearing a baseball cap with some trucking company logo on it. And he took one look under our hood and whistled low, shaking his head like he'd never seen anything like it. He pointed to this melted mess of wires and hoses that looked like someone had taken a blowtorch to them, asked us if we'd been driving with the temperature light on, but we both knew that Gage had been reading normal until just a few minutes ago. His wife stayed in their car with their kids, two little boys pressing their faces against the window to watch. And the dad offered to call a tow truck once they got to the next town with cell service, maybe 15 miles up the road. Nathan and I looked at each other, both thinking the same thing, that we couldn't wait here alone for a tow truck that might take hours to arrive, not with that mechanic knowing exactly where we'd broken down. The dad must have seen something in our faces because he offered to give us a ride to the next town, said there was a Motel 6 there where we could wait safely. And we didn't even hesitate before grabbing our bags and cramming into his back seat with his kids. The whole ride, I kept watching the mirrors, expecting to see that rust-covered truck appear behind us. But there was nothing, just regular traffic and the kids asking their dad a million questions about why we'd left our car behind. The dad dropped us at the motel like he'd promised. Wouldn't even take the $20 Nathan tried to give him for gas. Just told us to be more careful about where we got our cars fixed, and drove off with his family. We got a room on the second floor, as far from the stairs as possible, and Nathan called his mom while I stood at the window, watching every vehicle that pulled into the parking lot. We told her the car had broken down but left out everything else, didn't want to sound crazy or make her worry more than she already was. Around midnight, just when I was starting to think maybe we were being paranoid, maybe it had all been some weird coincidence, I saw it. The truck, creeping through the parking lot with its headlights off, moving between the rows of parked cars like it was looking for something specific. It stopped right below our window, engine idling rough and loud, and the assistant got out, walking around to the back of the truck where he pulled out what looked like a toolbox, the metal tools inside clanking against each other with every step he took toward the motel's entrance. Nathan was already on the phone with 911, whispering our location, and saying there were people following us who had sabotaged our car, and I could hear the dispatcher asking him to speak up, to slow down, to explain what was happening. I kept my eyes on the assistant, Watched him try the door to the motel office, which was locked since it was past midnight. Then saw him walk along the first floor, stopping at each room's window like he was listening for something. The mechanic got out of the truck then, carrying what looked like a slim Jim for breaking into cars, and they both started moving more purposefully, heading toward the exterior stairs that led to the second floor. Nathan was practically yelling into the phone now, telling them to hurry, that these men were coming up the stairs, and I grabbed the desk chair and wedged it under the door handle just as we heard footsteps on the metal stairs outside. The doorknob rattled, gentle at first like someone testing it, then harder, more insistent, and we could hear the assistants breathing through the thin door, heavy and excited like a dog that had cornered its prey. The police arrived maybe 3 minutes later, but those were the longest 3 minutes of my life. Listening to them working on the lock, feeling the door shake as they put their weight against it, hearing the mechanic's voice for the first time, low and calm, telling us to just open up, that he only wanted to talk, that we'd forgotten something at his shop. The sound of sirens made everything stop, and through the window I watched them both sprint back to their truck, the assistant dropping his toolbox in his panic, tools scattering across the asphalt. They peeled out of the parking lot just as the first police car turned in, and the officers found us barricaded in our room, both of us shaking so hard we could barely speak. They took our statements, said they'd send someone to check on the mechanic shop, but when they called us the next morning, the place was completely abandoned, cleared out like nobody had been there in years. Nathan's mom drove out to get us that afternoon, didn't say a word about us being idiots the whole ride home. Just kept touching our shoulders like she needed to make sure we were really there. We never made it to that warehouse job in California, never even tried to reschedule, and to this day I still check my mirrors constantly when I drive, still feel my chest tighten whenever I see a rust-covered truck, still wonder sometimes what would have happened if that family hadn't stopped to help us on the highway. January in Colorado means you respect the weather forecasts, especially when you're heading through the mountain passes. But sometimes life doesn't give you the luxury of waiting for clear skies. My mother had called that morning, voice breaking as she told me about the stroke. Dad was in the ICU in Denver, and she needed me there. Living in a small town on the western slope meant a 5-hour drive in good conditions. But the forecast showed a storm system moving in faster than expected. I'd graduated from nursing school just 2 years before, class of 2015, and worked at our local clinic. Medical emergencies were something I understood, and Dad needed family there now, not tomorrow. I packed my Subaru Outback with emergency supplies like any sensible person would. Blankets, water bottles, granola bars, a small shovel I kept in the back from previous winters. My roommate Heather tried convincing me to wait until morning, but I showed her the weather radar on my phone. If I left within the hour, I'd beat the worst of it by at least 3 hours. The pass would be cold but manageable. I'd driven it dozens of times since moving here after college. I filled up my tank at the Conoco station, grabbed an extra coffee for the road, and started the climb toward Vail Pass around 2 in the afternoon. The sky looked heavy but calm, that deceptive gray that makes you think maybe the meteorologists got it wrong this time. Everything changed about 90 minutes into the drive. I'd just passed the last exit before the real climb begins when the first fat snowflakes hit my windshield. Not the gentle dusting the forecast predicted, but those heavy wet flakes that stick instantly and multiply like cells under a microscope. Within 10 minutes, the road went from black asphalt to that dangerous slush that grabs your tires and pulls you sideways. Other cars started slowing down, hazard lights blinking through the increasing white. I turned my radio to the emergency weather station and heard the words that made my chest tighten. Unexpected blizzard conditions, wind gusts up to 60 miles per hour, visibility near zero. They were closing the pass behind me, but I was already too far up to turn around safely. The smart thing would have been pulling off at the next chain-up area and waiting it out with the semi-trucks, but Dad's face kept flashing in my mind. Mom texting me updates every hour, each one making the situation sound worse. "Your father's asking for you. She'd written 20 minutes ago. The doctors want to run more tests." So I kept driving, speedometer dropping to 30, then 20, then 15 miles per hour. My defroster worked overtime trying to keep the windshield clear, but ice built up faster than the blades could handle. I leaned forward, peering through a small, cleared patch, following the barely visible taillights of a pickup truck ahead. When those lights suddenly veered right and disappeared, I realized too late that the truck had taken an exit. I was alone on what I thought was still the main road, but the snow had erased all the lane markings, all the signs, everything that tells you where pavement ends and shoulder begins. I felt the exact moment my right tires caught the soft shoulder, that sickening pull to the side, the steering wheel fighting against my grip. I tried to correct gently, remembering everything they teach you about not oversteering in snow, but the car had already decided its own path. We slid sideways in slow motion, the world rotating past my windows in a white blur. The Subaru tilted, dropped, and came to rest at an angle in what I realized was a drainage ditch running parallel to the road. The engine coughed once and died. My heart hammered against my ribs as I turned the key. Click, nothing, tried again. Click. The dashboard lights flickered and went dark. I grabbed my phone from the cup holder, already knowing what I'd see. No service, of course. These mountain passes were dead zones even in good weather. The storm attacked my car like it had been waiting for this moment. Wind shrieked through the door seals, rocking the vehicle with each gust. Snow piled against the windows so fast I could actually watch it climbing, inch by inch. Within 20 minutes, the tires were completely buried, and the temperature inside started dropping despite the residual engine heat. I wrapped myself in one of the blankets from the back, rationing my phone battery by only checking for signal every 10 minutes. 4:30 became 5, 5 became 6, and full darkness fell like a curtain. The only light came from my phone screen when I checked it, creating brief moments of blue glow before plunging back into black. I tried not to think about statistics I'd heard about hypothermia, about how long a person could survive in a car during a blizzard. Instead, I focused on staying warm, keeping my feet moving, rubbing my hands together inside the blanket. Around what must have been 8 o'clock, I saw them through the rear window. 2 yellowish dots cutting through the white chaos, growing larger, brighter. Headlights. My whole body flooded with relief so intense it felt like stepping into a warm bath. I scrambled for my phone, turned on the flashlight, and waved it frantically at the rear window. The vehicle, some kind of large SUV or truck from what I could tell, slowed down and came to a stop maybe 30 feet behind me. I kept waving the light, expecting to see a door open, someone rushing over with help. But nothing happened. The headlights just sat there steady and unblinking through the storm. 1 minute passed, then 2, then 5. No honking to acknowledge they'd seen me, no hazard lights flashing. Just those 2 yellow eyes staring at my buried car. My relief began curdling into something else. Why weren't they getting out? Maybe they were calling for help, I reasoned, though I knew there was no cell service here either. Maybe they were afraid to leave their vehicle in these conditions. I waited another 5 minutes before my patience cracked. I pulled on my coat, steeled myself for the blast of cold, and pushed against my door. It opened about 6 inches before hitting packed snow. I squeezed out through the gap, immediately regretting the decision as wind-driven ice crystals stung every exposed bit of skin. I raised my arm to shield my face and started trudging toward the headlights, each step a battle against knee-deep snow. Halfway there, a figure emerged from the driver's side. They didn't rush toward me, didn't call out asking if I was okay. They just stood there beside their vehicle, watching me struggle through the snow. When I got close enough to make out more than a silhouette, I saw it was a man, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing what looked like a thick canvas work jacket. "Thank God you stopped," I shouted over the wind, my teeth already chattering. "My car died and I have no cell service. Can you call for help or give me a ride to the next town?" He didn't answer right away, just tilted his head slightly like he was studying me. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, too calm for the situation. Car trouble? He asked as if we were discussing the weather at a gas station. Yeah, slid off the road, engine won't start. I really need help. He nodded slowly, then looked past me toward my Subaru. You traveling alone? The question hit me wrong, sent a cold that had nothing to do with the storm creeping up my spine. My husband's expecting me, I lied, the words coming out instinctively. He knows this route. He'll send people looking soon. The man smiled then, just a small upturn of his lips that didn't reach his eyes. In this weather, nobody's coming up here tonight. Road's been closed for hours. He started walking toward my car without saying anything else, and I found myself following, confused and increasingly uneasy. He didn't walk like someone trying to help. He moved deliberately, almost leisurely despite the brutal conditions. When we reached my Subaru, he didn't check the hood or ask for my keys. Instead, he tried the driver's door handle, jiggling it when it stuck against the snow. Then he moved to the passenger side and did the same thing. He circled the entire vehicle, running his gloved hand along the windows, peering inside with his face pressed against the glass. My skin prickled with each movement he made. This wasn't someone checking the condition of my car. This was someone checking if anyone else was inside, cataloging what I had, assessing the situation. He completed his circle and stood by the driver's door again, then pulled something from his jacket pocket. In the dim light reflecting off the snow, I saw it was a window punch, the kind emergency responders use to break glass. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice pitched high with panic. He tapped the tool against the driver's window, not hard enough to break it, just enough to make a metallic clicking sound that somehow carried over the wind. "Just thinking about the best way to help you," he said, still with that unsettling calm. "Lots of valuable stuff in there. Would be a shame if something happened to it. Or to you." He turned to face me fully then, and I could see his expression clearly for the first time. His eyes were empty, flat like a shark's, and his mouth held that small smile that meant nothing good. "Here's what's going to happen," he said, taking a step toward me. "You're going to get your purse, your phone, whatever else you've got worth taking, and you're going to hand it all over. Then we're going to take a ride." Every self-defense article I'd ever read, every warning about isolated situations flashed through my mind. Never get in the vehicle. Never let them take you to a second location. But out here, in this storm, there was nowhere to run. I took a step backward, my mind racing for options. The snow was too deep to run effectively, and where would I go? Back to the road where no one would pass until morning? Into the woods where I'd die of exposure within hours? He seemed to read my thoughts, his smile widening slightly. "Smart girl, doing the math," he said. "Nobody knows you're here, nobody's coming. Storm won't clear until tomorrow afternoon at the earliest." He was right about everything except one detail. During my nursing training, we'd done a rotation in the ER where I'd learned that sometimes the difference between victim and survivor came down to seconds and decisiveness. While he talked, enjoying his moment of control, I let my hand drift to my coat pocket where I'd put my car keys earlier. Not for the car, but for the small canister of bear spray attached to the keychain, a gift from my roommate when I'd moved to Colorado. Mountain lions and bears, she'd said, though we both knew it worked on other predators too. When he took another step forward, reaching for my arm, I pulled the canister out and sprayed directly at his face. The orange cloud hit him instantly, and his confident posture crumbled. He screamed, dropping the window punch, both hands flying to his eyes. The wind actually helped for once, keeping the spray directed away from me and full in his face. He stumbled backward, slipped in the deep snow, and went down hard. I didn't wait to see what happened next. I ran toward his truck, still running with the driver's door open, and climbed inside. The interior smelled like cigarettes and something sour, old food maybe. His phone sat in the cup holder, and miracle of miracles, it showed 1 bar of signal. I called 911, my voice shaking as I told them about the assault, the location as best I could determine from the last mile marker I'd seen. They said units were already stationed at the base of the pass waiting for the storm to break, and they'd send someone as soon as conditions allowed. Behind me, I could hear him still moaning, cursing, trying to clear his eyes with snow. I locked the truck doors and waited, watching him in the mirrors as he eventually struggled to his feet and stumbled off into the storm, heading down the mountain on foot, rather than face what was coming. The police found me 3 hours later, still sitting in his truck with the heater running, the bear spray canister clutched in my lap. They found him too, about a mile down the road, half frozen and still partially blind, huddled behind a guardrail. Turns out this wasn't his first attempt at using weather as cover. There had been 2 other reports from the previous winter. Women who'd gone missing during storms on mountain passes, their cars found abandoned. They never proved he was connected to those cases, but he got 15 years for attempted kidnapping and assault. I made it to Denver the next afternoon, after the roads reopened and a tow truck pulled my Subaru out. Dad recovered from his stroke, slowly but surely. We don't talk about what happened on the pass, but he knows something changed in me that night. I still drive through mountains, still respect the weather, but now I understand that sometimes the storm isn't the real danger. Sometimes it's what uses the storm as cover, waiting for someone vulnerable, someone alone, someone who thinks the worst thing that can happen is getting cold. Honestly, I never thought I'd be the type to pick up a stranger on the highway. My dad drilled it into my head growing up. All those news stories about good Samaritans who ended up in ditches. But when you've been driving for 11 hours straight through the flatlands of Nebraska, with nothing but cornfields, and the occasional gas station to break the monotony, your brain starts playing tricks on you. The playlist I'd downloaded had cycled through twice already, and I'd chewed through an entire pack of gum trying to stay alert. My Ford Ranger was cruising along Interstate 80, somewhere between Lincoln and North Platte, when I first saw him. Just a silhouette, really, standing on the shoulder with his thumb out and a piece of cardboard held up against his chest. The sun was starting to dip low, painting everything orange and gold, and I barely registered him as I blew past doing 75. But something about the image stuck with me. The way he was hunched over, shoulders drawn in tight like he was trying to disappear into himself. About 20 minutes later, I passed him again. I'd pulled off at a rest stop to hit the bathroom and grab a coffee from one of those vending machines that dispenses something that barely qualifies as drinkable. When I got back on the highway, there he was. Same spot, same cardboard sign. He hadn't moved far, maybe walked a quarter mile at most. This time I got a better look as I approached. Thin guy, maybe in his 40s, wearing a canvas jacket that looked about 2 sizes too big, and a navy beanie pulled down low over his ears. His jeans were filthy, caked with what looked like mud up to the knees. The cardboard sign he held said, "Ogallala" in shaky black marker. That was my exit, another 40-some miles ahead. As I passed him the second time, he turned his head, and our eyes met for just a fraction of a second. His face was pale, almost gray, and his lips had that bluish tint you see on people who've been out in the cold too long. The temperature had dropped hard once the sun started going down, probably in the low 30s. I gripped the steering wheel tighter and kept driving, telling myself it wasn't my problem, that he'd find another ride, that plenty of truckers use this route. But guilt is a funny thing. It gnaws at you, especially when you're alone with nothing but your thoughts and the hum of the engine. I made it another 15 miles before I couldn't take it anymore. The image of that guy shivering on the roadside kept flashing in my head, and I started thinking about how I'd feel if I was stuck out there, how grateful I'd be if someone stopped. My ex-wife used to say I had a bleeding heart, that I needed to learn when to mind my own business. Maybe she was right. Spotted a wide shoulder coming up and hit my turn signal, even though there wasn't another car in sight. The Ranger rumbled as I pulled over, gravel crunching under the tires. I sat there for a moment with the engine idling, watching him in my side mirror as he jogged toward me. His gait was uneven, favoring his left leg, and he had this big Army surplus backpack bouncing against his spine. When he got close enough, I could see his breath coming out in quick white puffs. I reached over and unlocked the passenger door, immediately second-guessing everything. He pulled the door open and a blast of cold air rushed in, along with a smell that hit me right away. It was sharp and metallic, mixed with sweat and something earthy, like wet soil. He threw his backpack into the back seat before climbing in, and I noticed how heavy it landed, making the whole truck rock slightly. Up close, he looked worse than I'd thought. His face was gaunt, cheekbones jutting out prominent under skin that seemed stretched too tight. There was a gash on his lower lip, crusty and half-healed, and his fingernails were black with grime. But what really caught my attention were his eyes, pale green and bloodshot, with this intensity that made me want to look away. He didn't say anything at first, just pulled the door shut and sat there breathing hard, staring straight ahead through the windshield. I cleared my throat and tried to sound casual, asked him if Ogallala was where he was headed. He nodded slowly, still not looking at me, and muttered, "Yeah, appreciate it," in this hoarse voice that sounded like he hadn't used it in days. I put the truck back in drive and merged onto the highway, my hands suddenly feeling clammy against the steering wheel. The first 10 miles were dead silent except for the road noise and the heater blowing. I tried making small talk a couple times, asked him where he was coming from, if he'd been waiting long out there. He gave me these one-word answers that didn't invite any follow-up. "East," he said, when I asked about his starting point. "While," he answered about the wait time. His voice stayed flat and emotionless, like talking required too much effort. I focused on the road, watching the white lines disappear under my hood, and tried to convince myself this would be over soon. Ogallala was maybe 25 miles out now. I could handle 25 miles. Then he shifted in his seat, and I heard the zipper of his backpack being pulled open behind me. The sound made every muscle in my body tense up, but I kept my eyes forward, didn't want to seem paranoid. Through my peripheral vision, I could see him rifling through the bag, moving things around. Then he zipped it back up, but not all the way. It stayed partially open, and when I glanced in the rearview mirror, I could see something inside catching the dashboard light. Something long and silver. That's when he started with the questions. His tone changed, became more alert, more focused. "You traveling alone?" he asked, and the directness of it caught me off guard. I hesitated for a second too long before answering, then said, "Yeah, just me, heading to visit my brother in Wyoming. I don't even have a brother." The lie just came out automatically, some survival instinct kicking in. He made this sound in his throat, almost like a hum of acknowledgement. A few minutes passed, and then he asked, "Does anyone know your route? Like, did you tell someone where you're going?" The way he phrased it made my chest tighten. I told him my girlfriend knew my route, that I'd been texting her at every stop. Another lie. I'd been single for 8 months, and the only person who knew I was making this drive was my boss, and that was just because I'd requested the time off. He went quiet again, and I could feel him watching me in the rearview mirror. Not just glancing, but really staring, studying me. His pale green eyes were locked on mine in the reflection, unblinking, and there was this calculating quality to his gaze that made my throat go dry. I adjusted the mirror slightly, pretending I needed to check for traffic, really just trying to break that eye contact. "Do you usually pick people up?" he asked next, and there was something different in his voice now, something almost amused. I said no, that I normally don't, that I just felt bad seeing him out there in the cold. He laughed at that, this short, bitter sound that didn't contain any real humor. "That's good," he said. "Being predictable gets people hurt." I didn't know what to say to that, so I didn't say anything. My mind was racing now, playing out scenarios, calculating distances. We were still a good 15 miles from Ogallala, maybe 20 minutes at this speed. The highway stretched out empty in both directions. No other headlights visible anywhere. The sun had fully set now, and darkness pressed in on all sides, broken only by my headlights cutting through the night. He leaned forward suddenly, bringing his face closer to the gap between the seats, and I could smell that metallic scent again, stronger now. "You've got nice hands," he said, which was such a bizarre thing to say that I actually turned to look at him. Big mistake. His expression had changed completely. That blank, exhausted look was gone, replaced by something sharp and alert. He was smiling, but it was all wrong, didn't reach his eyes at all. That's when I saw his sleeve. His right arm was resting on the center console now, and the cuff of his jacket had ridden up just enough to expose his forearm. There were dark stains on the fabric, brown and crusty, running from his wrist up toward his elbow. Not mud. I'd convinced myself earlier that the stains on his jeans were mud, but this was different. This was unmistakably dried blood, and a lot of it. My eyes flicked to the rearview mirror again, to that partially unzipped backpack, and this time I could see it clearly. The handle of a hunting knife, the kind with a 6 or 7 inch blade, jutting out from between a wadded-up shirt and what looked like a rolled tarp. The handle was wrapped in black paracord and the pommel had this distinctive red cap. My heart was slamming against my ribs now, so hard I thought he must be able to hear it. Every single instinct in my body was screaming that I'd made a catastrophic mistake, that I was trapped in a confined space with someone dangerous, that the next exit was too far away and there was nowhere to run at 70 miles per hour. I had to do something. Sitting there paralyzed wasn't an option, and I knew that showing fear might trigger him, might make him act. So I forced myself to take a breath and tried to think clearly despite the adrenaline flooding my system. I remembered reading somewhere that you should humanize yourself to attackers, make them see you as a person, rather than a target. My voice came out steadier than I expected when I started talking, telling him about how I'd been driving since early morning, how I was exhausted and probably should have stopped at a motel hours ago. I mentioned the conference I was supposedly heading to in Cheyenne, made up details about presentations and colleagues, anything to fill the silence and seem normal. He didn't respond, just kept watching me with those pale eyes. Then I saw lights ahead, the glow of a truck stop maybe 2 miles up. A plan formed in my head, desperate but the only thing I could think of. I told him I needed to fuel up, that I was running close to empty. It was a lie. I had half a tank, but he couldn't see the gauge from where he sat. He tensed up immediately, said he'd wait in the truck, that he didn't like crowds. I insisted, said the company credit card required me to go inside and prepay. Another lie. My hands were gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles had gone white. As I took the exit and pulled into the truck stop, I could see it was busier than most of the places I'd stopped at. There were at least a dozen big rigs parked in the lot, their running lights glowing in the darkness, and through the windows I could see people moving around inside the convenience store. The fluorescent lights looked almost blinding after the darkness of the highway. I pulled up to a pump and killed the engine, and the sudden silence felt deafening. He was staring at me hard now, his jaw clenched tight, and I could see his right hand had moved to rest on top of that backpack in a way that seemed very deliberate. I opened my door and stepped out, my legs shaky, and started walking toward the store. Every step felt like it took forever, and I was terrified I'd hear his door open behind me, hear footsteps following. But when I glanced back, he was still in the truck, watching me through the windshield. The moment I got through those glass doors, I went straight to the clerk behind the counter, a heavy-set woman with tired eyes who barely looked up from her phone. I told her I needed her to call the police, that there was a man in my truck who I believed was dangerous. She must have seen something in my face because she put the phone down immediately and asked what was happening. I explained as quickly as I could, keeping my voice low, telling her about the blood, the knife, the questions he'd been asking. She didn't hesitate, just picked up the landline behind the counter and dialed 911. While she was talking to the dispatcher, I moved to the window and looked out at my truck. He was still sitting there, but his posture had changed. He was twisted around now, looking at his backpack, and I saw him pull the knife out fully, holding it low against his leg where it wouldn't be visible from outside. My stomach lurched. The clerk finished the call and told me State Patrol was about 15 minutes out, that they were sending 2 units. She said I should stay inside, that her manager was in the back, and there were a couple of truckers getting coffee who would help if anything happened. Those 15 minutes felt like hours. I stood there watching my truck, watching him, and he never moved. Just sat there with that knife in his hand, occasionally looking toward the store. Other customers came and went, completely oblivious to what was happening. A guy in a Carhartt jacket asked me if I was okay, because I must have looked as terrified as I felt, and I just nodded and said I was waiting for someone. When the patrol cars finally pulled in, no sirens but lights flashing red and blue across the parking lot. Everything happened fast. 2 officers approached my truck from different angles, hands on their weapons, and I saw the passenger door fly open. He bolted, took off running toward the back of the lot where it bordered a field. 1 officer went after him on foot while the other got back in his cruiser and circled around. They caught him within maybe 3 minutes, tackled him down between 2 parked semis. I watched the whole thing through the window, my entire body shaking now that the adrenaline was draining out. The officers brought him back in handcuffs, and that's when I saw his face clearly under the parking lot lights. Whatever mask he'd been wearing in my truck was gone. He looked furious and desperate, thrashing against the cuffs, shouting something I couldn't make out. They put him in the back of one of the patrol cars, and then came inside to talk to me. Turned out the knife wasn't the worst of it. When they searched his backpack, they found zip ties, duct tape, and a second knife, plus a wallet that didn't belong to him. The officer told me they'd been looking for someone matching his description in connection with an assault 2 counties over, that a driver had been attacked at a rest stop 4 days earlier and barely survived. The guy had been working this stretch of highway, targeting solo drivers, waiting for someone trusting enough to stop. I'd gotten lucky, the officer said. Lucky that I'd trusted my instincts and gotten out when I did. I never felt lucky though, just sick thinking about how close it had been. How differently that night could have ended if I'd stayed on that dark highway just a few more miles. They impounded my truck as evidence temporarily, and one of the officers gave me a ride to a hotel in Ogallala. I sat in that room all night with the lights on, couldn't sleep, kept seeing those pale green eyes staring at me in the rearview mirror. The next day, they released my truck and I finished the drive to Wyoming, but I took the long way, stayed on major highways with lots of traffic, and I've never picked up a hitchhiker since. Not once. Some lessons you only need to learn one time, and mine came with a hunting knife and dried blood on a stranger's sleeve. Nobody tells you how fast things can go wrong on a road trip. My girlfriend Vanessa and I had been planning this drive for months, saving up vacation days from our jobs to finally take 2 weeks and just disappear into the mountains. We left Portland on a Friday morning in May, my old Nissan Pathfinder packed with camping gear, a cooler full of sandwiches, and a playlist we'd spent an entire evening putting together. Vanessa worked as a nurse at a pediatric clinic, and I did IT support for a medical supply company, which meant we were both desperate for this break from fluorescent lights and the same 4 walls. The route we picked took us through some of the most remote parts of the Cascades, winding roads that barely saw traffic except during peak summer months. We were both in our early 30s, old enough to know better than to wing it completely, but young enough to still think we were invincible. That first day felt perfect. The kind of perfect that makes you forget the world exists outside your car windows. We'd been driving for about 6 hours when the temperature gauge started climbing. It happened gradually at first, just a slow creep past the halfway mark, then suddenly it was in the red, and steam was hissing from under the hood. I pulled over immediately, heart pounding because we were in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by pine trees so thick you couldn't see more than 20 feet into the forest. The road here was barely 2 lanes, with a narrow bridge just ahead spanning what looked like a dry creek bed about 15 feet below. There was a tiny shoulder, mostly gravel and loose rock, and I managed to get the Pathfinder as far right as possible without sliding down the embankment. Vanessa grabbed her phone instinctively, but we both knew before she even checked that there wouldn't be any signal. We'd lost bars about 40 minutes back, right after passing through the last small town. I popped the hood and immediately regretted it as a cloud of steam billowed out, smelling like burnt metal and antifreeze. The engine was making this ticking sound, like it was counting down to something worse. Neither of us knew much about cars beyond basic maintenance, and standing there staring at the hissing engine, I felt completely useless. We stood there for maybe 10 minutes, debating what to do. Vanessa suggested we wait for the engine to cool down and try adding water from our camping supplies, which seemed like the only plan we had. The road was eerily quiet, no cars in either direction, just wind moving through the pines and the occasional bird call. I remember feeling this weight in my chest, not quite panic but close to it, that specific anxiety of being stranded in a place where help might not come for hours. Then we heard it. The rumble of an engine coming from the direction we'd been heading, growing louder as it climbed the grade. A dark blue pickup truck came around the bend, and for a second I felt relief wash over me. Someone was coming. Someone could help. But then the truck slowed down way before it reached us, like the driver was assessing the situation from a distance, and something about that deliberate slowness made my stomach tighten. The truck crept forward and pulled in behind our Pathfinder, close enough that I could see the driver clearly through his windshield. The man who got out was probably in his late 40s, wearing a faded denim jacket and work boots that looked genuinely worn. He had this weathered face, tanned and lined in a way that suggested he spent most of his time outdoors, and he smiled as he approached, hands visible and open like he was trying to appear non-threatening. "Looks like you folks are having some trouble," he called out, his voice friendly enough but somehow too loud for the quiet of the woods. I nodded, explained about the overheating, tried to sound grateful because, honestly, what else were we going to do? He walked closer, peering at the steam still wisping from the engine, and then he said something that didn't quite register as strange until later. "Best thing is for both of you to step away from the vehicle while I take a look. Engine fires can happen real quick with overheating like this." Vanessa and I exchanged a glance. It seemed reasonable on the surface, but there was no visible fire, no smell of burning beyond the antifreeze. Still, we backed up a few steps, giving him room to work. He leaned in, touching nothing, just looking, and then he straightened up and said, "Yeah, you're going to need a tow. Lucky I came along. My brother runs a garage about 20 miles back. I can give you a lift there, get this sorted out." That's when things started feeling wrong in a way I couldn't ignore. 20 miles back would put us past the last town we'd driven through, and I distinctly remembered seeing a gas station there with a service bay. Why would we need to go to his brother's place specifically? Before I could process that thought, Vanessa spoke up, her voice carefully polite. "Actually, we were thinking of just letting it cool down and adding water. We have some with us." The man's expression didn't change exactly, but something shifted in his eyes. A flicker of irritation, maybe, or calculation. "Water's not going to fix this," he said, and now he was moving closer to Vanessa, gesturing toward the engine in a way that made him step between us. "See, what you've got here is probably a cracked radiator hose. Maybe worse. You try to drive this thing and you'll seize the engine completely. Then you're really stuck." His logic sounded convincing, but his body language was all wrong. He kept positioning himself so we couldn't easily get back to the car doors, and his eyes kept darting to our camping gear visible through the back window like he was taking inventory. Then he changed his story. "Actually, you know what? My cousin has a tow truck. He's closer, just about 8 miles that way." He pointed in the opposite direction from where he'd claimed his brother's garage was. "I could call him from my place, have him come get you." Vanessa's hand found mine, her fingers cold despite the warm afternoon. I could feel her pulse racing through her palm. The man was now standing directly in front of our car, blocking the driver's side door. Still talking, but his words were starting to blur together in my head, because all I could focus on was how deliberately he'd moved into that position. "The thing is," he continued, and his smile was still there, but it looked painted on now, "you folks really shouldn't stay out here. It's not safe. There's been problems on this stretch of road. People getting stranded, bad things happening." The way he said bad things made every hair on my neck stand up. He wasn't warning us. He was threatening us, and the mask of helpfulness was slipping. I noticed his truck was running, still idling behind ours, and he'd left the driver's door open. My mind was racing through options, none of them good. We were miles from anywhere, no cell service, and this man clearly didn't want to just help us with our car. He wanted us away from it, isolated, vulnerable. Vanessa squeezed my hand harder, and I knew she'd arrived at the same conclusion I had. We needed to get out of there, engine problems or not. I made my voice as steady as I could manage. We really appreciate you stopping, but I think we're going to try the water first. We don't want to put you out. I started moving toward the passenger side of the Pathfinder, pulling Vanessa with me, trying to circle around the front of the car to get to the driver's door without being obvious about it. The man stepped sideways, mirroring our movement, and now he wasn't smiling at all. "I don't think you understand the situation," he said, and his tone had dropped lower, more insistent. "You can't stay here. It's not a suggestion." That last part came out almost angry, like we'd insulted him by refusing his help. My heart was slamming against my ribs. Vanessa moved first, suddenly breaking away from me and going straight for the driver's door while I lunged for the passenger side. The man shouted something, started moving toward us, but we were faster. I threw myself into the seat and Vanessa already had the keys in the ignition, her nurse training kicking in with that same calm efficiency she used during emergencies at work. The engine turned over once, twice, and I was certain it wouldn't start, that we'd be trapped there with this man who was now at the driver's window. His face contorted with rage, pounding on the glass with his fist. The engine caught. Vanessa threw it into drive and we lurched forward, the temperature gauge already climbing back into the red, steam starting to pour from under the hood again. Behind us, the man was running back to his truck, and I watched in the side mirror as he jumped in. He was coming after us. The road ahead curved sharply, following the mountainside, and we were heading downhill now, which was the only thing saving us because Vanessa didn't dare push the gas pedal too hard with the engine in the state it was in. The Pathfinder shuddered and coughed, making horrible grinding noises, but it kept moving. The blue pickup appeared in the mirror, closer than it should have been, and I could see him behind the wheel, leaning forward like he was hunting us. Vanessa's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. "We can coast," she said, her voice tight but focused. "If the engine dies, we can coast downhill. Just keep going." She was right. The grade was steep enough that gravity would carry us even without power, though steering and brakes would be harder. The temperature gauge was pinned completely in the red now, and I could smell burning rubber mixing with the antifreeze. The pickup was gaining. He was driving aggressively, taking the curves too fast, and I realized he was trying to catch us before we reached any kind of civilization or other cars on the road. Then, like a miracle, we rounded a bend and saw them. 2 cars coming up the mountain toward us, the first traffic we'd seen in over an hour. Vanessa laid on the horn, a long, desperate blast, and I watched the pickup behind us suddenly brake hard. The lead car, a minivan with a family inside, slowed down as they passed us, the driver's face confused and concerned. The pickup had fallen back significantly, and as we continued down the mountain, passing the second car now too, I saw him pull off onto a side road, disappearing into the trees. He was gone just like that. The presence of witnesses had made him abandon whatever he'd been planning. Vanessa kept driving, the Pathfinder groaning and smoking but somehow still moving, until we crested another hill and saw the most beautiful sight I'd ever witnessed. A small ranger station with 2 vehicles parked outside and an actual building with lights on. She pulled into the lot and the engine finally gave up completely, dying with a sound like a mechanical death rattle. We sat there for a moment, neither of us speaking, both of us shaking now that the adrenaline was wearing off. The ranger on duty was a woman named Janet, probably in her 50s, with kind eyes that got very serious very fast when we told her what had happened. She called it in immediately on her radio, describing the truck, the location, asking if there were any units in the area. While she talked, she brought us water and made us sit down because Vanessa looked like she might pass out. "You did the right thing getting out of there," Janet said after she'd finished with the radio. "We've had reports. 3 incidents in the past 2 months on this stretch, and the highway patrol has been looking for someone matching that description." She pulled out a clipboard with what looked like incident reports. "Man in a dark blue pickup offers help to stranded motorists, tries to get them away from their vehicles. One couple last month, he told them there was a rock slide ahead and their car wasn't safe where it was, tried to convince them to leave it and ride with him to the next town." They refused and he got aggressive, just like with you folks. My stomach turned. What happened to them? I asked. Janet's expression was grim. They managed to drive away too, but barely. The other incident, a solo driver, a woman, she wasn't so lucky. He damaged her car while she was checking the engine, slashed a tire, made it so she couldn't leave. A truck driver happened to come along and scared him off, but she was pretty shaken up. Highway Patrol showed up about 40 minutes later. 2 officers who took detailed statements from both of us. They had us describe everything: the truck, the man's appearance, his exact words, the side road where he'd turned off. One of the officers, a younger guy who couldn't have been more than 25, told us they'd been coordinating with multiple agencies across the region. He's smart, the officer said, and I hated how much respect was in his voice for this predator's methodology. He targets people in remote areas, always offers help that sounds legitimate at first, tries to separate them from their vehicle or get them isolated. We think he's been operating for at least 6 months, maybe longer, moving between different mountain passes. They asked if we'd be willing to work with a sketch artist, help them get a better description out to other agencies. We agreed immediately. The whole time we were talking to them, I kept thinking about how close we'd come. If Vanessa hadn't trusted her instincts, if we'd been polite and compliant the way we're trained to be in society, if those other cars hadn't come along when they did. The Pathfinder was totaled. The mechanic who came to tow it said the engine had basically melted from the inside, but I didn't care. We were alive. Janet let us stay at the ranger station until a friend of hers could drive up from the nearest town to give us a ride to a hotel. We spent that night in a place with actual locks on the doors, and I don't think either of us slept more than an hour. Every sound in the hallway made us both sit up. The next day, we rented a car and drove straight home to Portland, abandoning the rest of our trip completely. The Highway Patrol called us a week later. They'd found the truck, abandoned in a campground about 60 miles from where we'd encountered him, but the man was gone. The truck had been reported stolen 3 weeks earlier from a parking lot in Spokane. They found materials in the bed of the truck: rope, duct tape, a tarp, things that made the officer on the phone go quiet when I asked what they'd discovered. "Let's just say you folks made the right call," he finally said. They never caught him, as far as I know. The officer said he probably moved to a different region, a different hunting ground, after we got away and the reports increased. That's what haunts me the most, knowing he's still out there, still pulling over to help stranded drivers somewhere. Vanessa and I don't take road trips anymore. We fly when we need to travel, and if we absolutely have to drive, we stick to major highways during daylight hours. People think we're paranoid, and maybe we are, but they weren't there on that mountain road. They didn't see the look in that man's eyes when his mask slipped, didn't feel that specific terror of realizing someone is hunting you. Sometimes I still dream about it. That narrow bridge, the sound of his fist on the window, the blue pickup in the rearview mirror, and I wake up grateful that we're both still here to have those nightmares. Long drives have always felt like a strange mix of freedom and limbo for me, and that particular trip was supposed to be a reset from a rough stretch at work. I was traveling with my friend Colin, someone I'd known since high school, the kind of guy who kept road trips lively with random playlists and stories I'd already heard a dozen times. We weren't rushing anywhere, just cutting across states with no fixed schedule, stopping whenever we felt like stretching or grabbing snacks. The day had been quiet so far, the kind of steady sunlight that makes the pavement shimmer and the miles blur together. Somewhere between the endless stretches of farmland and clusters of tiny towns, I noticed an old cream-colored sedan in the rearview mirror, a model from the early 2000s with dull headlights and a mismatched front bumper. It didn't stand out at first, just another car on a 2-lane highway, but something about the way it lingered behind us eventually caught my attention. A lot of drivers passed, others fell back, but that one kept appearing in the same spot, not too close, not too far. Our first stop was at a small gas station that looked like it hadn't been updated in 20 years. The kind with faded soda posters taped crookedly to the windows, and a single ice machine humming louder than it should. Colin went inside to grab jerky and energy drinks, while I topped off the tank, enjoying the short break from the monotony. That's when I spotted the sedan again pulling into the far end of the lot. It didn't approach the pumps right away. Instead, it idled for a few seconds before settling into a parking spot facing the road. The driver never got out, at least not while we were there. At the time, I brushed it off as coincidence. Highways connect everything. People end up crossing paths without meaning to. Still, the image of the car sitting there with dark windows and a slightly tilted front license plate stuck with me longer than it should have. We got back on the road, and after a while the creeping tension faded. Colin joked about how my highway paranoia was finally kicking in after all these years, and I laughed it off, even though I kept glancing at the mirrors more than usual. We stopped again a couple of hours later, this time at a convenience store attached to a tiny diner. The sun was dropping a bit, turning everything that soft golden color that makes gas pumps look almost nostalgic. I walked around to stretch, feeling the stiffness in my legs, and for a moment the world just felt normal again. Kids whining for candy inside, the cashier shouting a greeting to someone she knew, the clatter of dishes from the diner next door. Then as we pulled out onto the road again, I caught a glimpse of something in the side mirror that made my chest tighten in a way I couldn't explain. The same cream-colored sedan was emerging from the store's exit lane, merging behind us like it had been waiting. By then, even Colin had stopped joking, though he tried to play it cool. He leaned forward in his seat, watching through the passenger mirror as the sedan kept pace behind us. Not tailgating, not drifting away, just hanging there like it had subscribed to our trip. We tested it in small ways, turning off abruptly onto a less traveled road, taking a detour through a small town with narrow streets and a dozen confusing intersections, even pulling off into a scenic overlook to take photos. Each time, it eventually reappeared. Not immediately, not dramatically, just at some point, quietly returning to its usual position a few cars behind. The repetition made the whole situation feel strange, like we had stumbled into someone else's plan without realizing it. I kept trying to rationalize it. Same route, same direction. Long drives attract patterns. But the more I tried to explain it, the heavier the unease became. We decided the safest move was to head toward a bigger rest stop, one of those large ones with fast food chains, long rows of parking, and plenty of people moving around. The traffic picked up as we got closer, and the sedan slipped in behind a couple of trucks, making it harder to track. For a few minutes I thought we'd lost it, and that maybe we'd spent the entire afternoon spooking ourselves over nothing. The lot was crowded when we pulled in, families walking their dogs, kids chasing each other between parked cars, people carrying bags of food back to their vehicles. It felt like a small pocket of safety after hours of empty roads. We parked near the center, surrounded by minivans and SUVs, and the noise of conversations and car doors slamming helped loosen the tension that had built in my shoulders. Colin stretched his arms and said something about grabbing fries, and I almost let myself relax. Then I caught sight of it again. The cream-colored sedan rolled slowly into the lot, passing the first few rows as if searching for something specific. It didn't pull into a space near us, and for a second I wondered if I was imagining patterns where none existed. But then it settled several rows away, angled slightly toward our direction, engine still running. The driver stayed inside, unmoving, the silhouette barely visible through the glare on the windshield. There was something unnerving about how still the car looked in a place full of motion. Kids darting between cars, people weaving in and out, yet that one vehicle remained fixed in place. Colin noticed my expression shift and followed my gaze. "He's back?" he asked quietly, and I nodded, the discomfort creeping back faster than I wanted to admit. Inside the rest stop building, the air conditioning blasted hard enough to sting a little after the thick heat outside. We walked slowly past a row of vending machines, pretending to browse while keeping an eye on the windows facing the parking lot. The sedan stayed put, no door opening, no sign of movement, just that still, angled presence. Colin tried calling a non-emergency line in the state we were crossing, but after navigating through automated menus, he gave up with an irritated sigh. We debated asking someone working the counter, but what exactly were we supposed to say? There's a car just sitting out there? People do that all the time on long trips. That was the worst part. There was nothing technically happening, nothing we could point to that proved danger. Yet my instincts kept tugging at me like a string pulled too tight. We lingered longer than necessary inside, bought food we didn't want, walked slow laps between the restrooms and the small travel gear section, anything to stall time. Eventually, though, there was no excuse left, and we headed back outside. The sedan was still there. Same angle, same silence. The sun had dipped lower, turning the sky a muted orange-gray that made the lot feel less cheerful than before. We got in our car and locked the doors immediately. Colin muttered that we should stay put until more people returned to their vehicles, so we waited, pretending to scroll on our phones while watching the sedan every few seconds. At one point, a large RV passed between us and it, and when it rolled away, the sedan's headlights were on even though the sky wasn't dim enough to need them. Something about that detail lodged in my mind like a splinter. We left the rest stop only when a steady line of cars was pulling out, figuring the extra traffic might give us some cover. Colin suggested taking an exit toward a busier town ahead, somewhere with hotels, well-lit parking lots, and more people around. I nodded, even though my focus was glued to the side mirror. For the first 10 minutes, all I could see behind us were trucks and SUVs, each one a small wave of relief. Then, on a long straight stretch, the sedan appeared again. This time it merged from a different on-ramp, slotting itself 3 or 4 cars back like it had never lost track of us. The realization made my throat tighten, the kind of pressure that makes it hard to swallow. Colin whispered, "How is that even possible?" And I didn't have an answer. The road felt smaller after that, like we were being funneled into someone else's route. The moment we spotted signs for a state police station a few miles ahead, Colin insisted we take the exit. I turned on the blinker earlier than necessary, hoping the sedan wouldn't react, and we veered off the highway onto a short access road lined with tall grass and a few industrial buildings. The sedan stayed on the main road and didn't follow the exit, at least not where we could see. Even then, neither of us celebrated. We drove straight into the police lot and parked in front of the building, the kind of place with a flagpole out front and a single patrol car idling near the entrance. Inside, we explained what had been happening to a desk officer, who listened with a serious expression, jotting down the make and color of the vehicle. He didn't dismiss us, which somehow felt both reassuring and alarming at the same time. Another officer joined the conversation, a woman with sharp eyes and a voice that carried a weight of experience. She asked specific questions: how many stops the car had appeared at, whether we ever saw the driver, whether the sedan ever pulled close enough to read the plate. She exchanged a glance with the desk officer, and I didn't miss how subtle that glance was. She finally told us that sometimes traffickers on long routes look for travelers who seem tired or unguarded, shadowing them for hours or even days before choosing the right moment to approach. They wait for isolation, she explained. Places where cars thin out, where visibility is low, where a quick grab wouldn't draw attention. Hearing that made the whole day snap into sharper focus, like the pieces had been sitting right there and we hadn't known how to arrange them. We filed an official report, gave every detail we could remember, and the officers offered to watch the surrounding roads for a while in case the sedan reappeared in town. Colin and I ended up staying at a nearby motel with the police station's number saved on speed dial, though neither of us slept much. The next morning, when we went back to thank the officers before getting on the road again, they told us nothing matching the sedan had been spotted overnight. Maybe the driver kept going. Maybe they circled back another way. I still think about it sometimes. The way that car stayed just close enough to track us but far enough to keep doubt alive. We finished the trip sticking to crowded routes, stopping only in busy places and keeping our eyes on every mirror. Nothing strange happened after that day, and the sedan never reappeared. But something changed in me. Long drives don't feel the same anymore, and I still catch myself scanning parking lots without realizing it. Anything to make sure no one else is quietly waiting for a moment I won't see coming. Pulling into that motel felt more like giving in than making a choice. I'd been on the road with my friend Eric since sunrise, and by the time we spotted the flickering sign on the side of the highway, my eyes were doing that thing where every set of headlights looked identical. The place had chipped paint, a sagging balcony rail, and a front office that smelled like microwaved soup, but we were too drained to care. I remember leaning on the check-in counter while the clerk spoke slowly, like he'd given up trying to sound welcoming. My body felt heavy in a way that made it weirdly hard to focus, like my thoughts had slipped into low gear. The last room available was right at the end of the row, closest to the dark stretch of trees. When we walked over, the gravel popped under our shoes louder than it should have, echoing in that long, empty parking lot. The whole place looked like everyone else had vanished before we arrived. We popped the trunk, trying to gather our stuff in one go, when this low, steady humming caught my attention. Parked 3 spaces away was an old pickup with its engine running, headlights off, just idling in one note. The shape of a man sat in the driver's seat, elbows wide, leaning back a little like he'd been sitting there a while. I couldn't make out his face, but the angle of his head told me exactly where he was looking. Straight toward our room, the one we were about to unlock. It wasn't curiosity. He stayed completely still, not even adjusting his posture. Eric muttered something about people hanging out in their cars, but it didn't match what we were seeing. Something in me pressed down, the kind of instinct that makes you tighten your grip on your keys. We hurried our bags inside, but kept glancing through the blinds like we were waiting for a reason to move again. Inside, the room matched the price. Thin curtains, a carpet that felt slightly uneven under my shoes, and a bedspread with a pattern that looked like it belonged in a dentist's waiting room. I tried to shake the tension off, telling myself the guy in the truck probably didn't care about us at all. Still, every time the AC clicked on, I jumped a little, as if expecting something else to make noise next. Eric laughed it off, trying to lighten the mood, but I noticed he wouldn't stand too close to the window. After a few minutes, I managed to relax enough to stretch out on the bed, though the mattress dipped just enough on one side to make me constantly shift. The truck outside kept idling, that low vibration slipping through the walls like a reminder we weren't alone. Eventually, the engine sound cut off, and for a moment silence felt even worse. I must have drifted in and out because the next thing I remember is this soft metal click coming from the door. At first I thought it was part of a dream, but then it came again. Slow, deliberate, like someone testing how quietly they could move a handle. I sat up straight, listening hard, and another faint sound followed. A gentle tap against the glass near my side of the bed. Not a bang, not a knock. More like someone brushing a knuckle just enough to announce they were there. My chest tightened, and every sense sharpened at once. Eric whispered, asking if I heard it too, and the way his voice shook told me this wasn't my imagination. The tapping came again, just once, like whoever was out there wanted to be sure we were awake to notice. I didn't speak, didn't move, just stared at the curtains, while warmth drained from my face in a slow wash. We stayed absolutely still for what felt like a long time, listening for any hint of movement outside. The motel's walls were thin enough that even the ice machine down the walkway usually rattled through, but now everything had turned unnaturally quiet. That's what made the next sound so unnerving. This slow shuffle, almost like a boot sliding on gravel right beneath our window. Eric leaned forward, trying to peek through the narrow gap in the curtains without pulling them aside. But he stopped halfway, stiffening like he'd seen something he regretted catching a glimpse of. I whispered his name, but he didn't answer right away. Just lifted one hand as if telling me to wait. That tiny gesture made my pulse hammer against my ribs. When he finally spoke, his voice came out barely audible. He said there was someone standing close enough that he could see the shape of their shoulder through the curtain's fabric. I didn't dare look. For a while, whoever it was just stood there, not tapping anymore, not trying the handle again, just lingering. That stillness felt intentional, like they were waiting for us to make a mistake. Every creak in the wooden frame of the building made me tense. I kept imagining the person outside leaning closer, trying to listen through the wall. Eventually, the crunch of steps drifted away, moving toward the far end of the lot. Eric let out a shaky exhale and finally backed away from the window, running his hand over his face like he was trying to erase the image. Neither of us said much after that. There was this unsaid agreement that if we talked about it out loud, we'd make the situation too real to ignore. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the door, half expecting the handle to twitch again. The clock on the nightstand ticked so loudly it felt like the room had shrunk around us. Sleeping became impossible after that. Every time I started to drift, some faint noise pulled me back. What sounded like a light footstep outside, then something brushing against the siding, then a car passing on the highway that made me think someone was pulling in again. At one point, I swear I heard breathing, low and steady, right on the other side of the door. I pressed my ear closer, unsure if I wanted confirmation or denial, but the sound faded before I could be certain. Eric kept the lamp on, his knees pulled up, staring at the door like he expected someone to burst through at any moment. The room felt smaller and heavier with every passing minute. I kept replaying the image of that truck in the parking lot, the man sitting motionless with the engine rumbling. Something told me he hadn't left as quietly as we wished. By the time dawn hinted at the edge of the curtains, we were both wide awake, drained in a way that felt bone deep. As soon as the sky brightened enough to see shadows clearly, we gathered our stuff, determined to get out of that room without lingering. When we stepped outside, the air felt cold and sharp, almost too fresh compared to the suffocating atmosphere inside. The lot looked empty except for a few scattered cars, but there were footprints in the gravel leading right past our door. Deep impressions, as if someone had stood there for a long time. Eric stared at them without speaking. We made our way to the front office, hoping the morning light would make everything feel ridiculous, something we could laugh about later. But the clerk didn't look surprised when we mentioned the noises. He rubbed the back of his neck and said break-ins happened more often than people thought, especially when travelers arrived looking exhausted. He added that some thieves waited until guests were too tired to react quickly. Hearing it explained so casually made my chest tighten again, like all the fear from the night settled back into place. We left that motel fast, both of us checking the mirrors far more often than usual as we drove away. Even after getting back on the highway, I kept glancing toward every vehicle that stayed behind us longer than necessary. There was this old sedan that seemed to hover in the left lane for several miles, never passing, never falling back. Every time it lined up parallel to us, I felt a jolt run through me, as if the night hadn't fully ended. Eventually it sped off, disappearing over a rise in the road, but the unease stuck with both of us. Eric tried turning on the radio, hoping some background noise would help settle things, but every song felt out of place. I realized that what scared me the most wasn't the tapping or the handle moving. It was the idea that someone had singled us out, watched us long enough to think we'd be an easy target. That thought clung to me harder than any sound we heard in that room. Hours later, we pulled into a small diner, deciding we needed real food before our nerves got any worse. While we sat there, the waitress, a middle-aged woman with a messy apron and a calm voice, asked if we were coming from the motel down the road. When we nodded, she sighed like she'd asked the question too many times already. She said travelers stopped in all the time talking about strange noises and people wandering the lot at night. According to her, the place didn't bother upgrading security because guests rarely stayed more than one night. Hearing her say that made something click in my mind. The man in the truck hadn't stared at us by accident. He'd been waiting for someone exactly like us, two people so tired they barely looked around before unlocking their door. I felt a wave of disgust knowing we'd been seen as an opportunity. After leaving the diner, we agreed we'd never stay at a roadside place like that again, no matter how exhausted we were. The rest of the drive was quiet, both of us processing everything in our own way. Every so often, Eric would tap the steering wheel in this jittery rhythm he didn't seem aware of, and I caught myself checking the door lock 3 or 4 times even though it was obviously secure. That night changed the way I travel more than anything else I've ever experienced. Before then, I never thought about how obvious fatigue looks to a stranger, how easy it is for someone to pick the most worn-out person in a parking lot. I kept replaying the tapping on the window, wondering what the stranger outside hoped would happen next if we had reacted differently. To this day, whenever I check into a hotel, no matter how nice or busy, I pause before closing the door. I make sure the deadbolt slides fully, that the latch fits tight, that no one is lurking nearby. I still think about the footsteps in the gravel, the stillness outside our window, the way the clerk explained it like it was part of the routine. But the part that unsettles me most is that nothing actually stopped that person from coming back. They didn't run when we stayed quiet. They just waited until they got bored or saw a better chance elsewhere. Maybe that's the only real ending to the story. Nothing happened because we happened to make the one choice, staying silent, that made us less interesting to whoever was out there. And even though we walked away unharmed, the fear of what almost happened still sits in the back of my mind every time I travel.